problems with registration, some problems with flights, but we'll get going. As you can see, we have a camera on us, and it will be here all afternoon. And I was supposed to use the mic, and I already forgot to get the sound going. Adam MacDonald and I will actually be facilitating. We are not here to present, we're here to raise some questions and see what you think about them, and then we'll tell you that you're wrong and we've got a better idea. Something like that, okay? Obviously, I'm the shy guy from England with the English accent, but I've been here long enough to actually understand the difference between bonnet and hood and aluminium and aluminum and things like that. So I try to work between two languages, even if they try not to actually work for me all the time. So, what do we have? It's supposed to be 25 people, and obviously they're not all here, and a couple of you weren't on the list that I was given. So in theory, we were going to get to about 27 people, although I think we just lost one gentleman because he has a technology problem. I was given a list that basically said people came in different categories. So who's a rector or a dean? Raise your hand. Yeah, one. Okay, so there's 4 missing. Who's other clergy? 1. Okay. 2, 3. Very good. The clergy's beating the rectors. Vestry, wardens, officers. A few of those. Very good. I can put my hand up for that. Stewardship. Okay. Formation. Finance. Yes. Okay. Outreach. Who's an other? Just put your hand up if you're an other. Okay. So what sort of other are you?
Bishop staff.
Okay.
Canon to the ordinary.
Okay. Any others?
I'm Director of Development, kind of assistant to the rector.
Okay.
I'm Director of a Performing Arts Community Center.
Very good.
I'm the Executive Director of an NGO, educational organization.
We were at this point going to get you to say a little bit more about yourselves, but I think we'll give time for other people to arrive so that they don't actually lose out on all of that. We're supposed to run from 2 till 6 today. We were aiming, based on the plan we put together, to try to actually finish. Like, there's a reception at 6 o'clock. And it was like, do you really want to walk out of here and walk straight to the reception? You probably would like to go to your room and freshen up and stuff. So we're going to aim to finish about 5:30 in terms of understanding. And obviously we're in Crescent Hill. Even if you looked at the agenda about a week ago, you would have found we were in a different room. But thankfully you found us, and there may be some people sitting in the ballroom down the road that don't actually realise that we're in here. Try to put this together in terms of the agenda using the smallest number of MBA words possible. Okay? So we try to put this into English in terms of why strategy, like why do you even need one? Where are we today? Define the future. Where are we today in terms of an assessment? Plan and deliver the future. Leadership, original change, and hopefully the first steps in a strategy for you. Would be really useful for us. We're going to introduce ourselves in terms of whatever, but if you in 30 seconds could just say, what are you hoping to get from this session? We are very flexible and we can change our opinions just like that to fit in with what you would like. So if you can actually tell us, so why don't we just start here and go around, 20 to 30 seconds, what would you really like to be able to walk away with?
You can just pass this along to ourselves.
So before I became a priest, I worked in corporate life, in my own business, and so I'm looking at how we take what we learn in the business world into church world in a way that's more compassionate and more caring than what we did in business.
I'm on the vestry, a warden, also stewardship and finance, and we have come into some money that we are very interested in managing.
Are you open to sharing?
Unfortunately, most of it is going to be going into the building, but what's left, we want to maintain.
I don't know. Yeah, sometimes. I'm on the vestry. One of the wardens, also stewardship, finance, outreach. I am the youngest person on the vestry, probably the youngest person in the room. And I work in government in the city of New York, and I really like to, and we're in a community that is changing, and our congregation is also changing and evolving, and so I'm looking for ways to understand how to bridge that gap, how to continue to engage the community the new community and keep those folks who have been there to stay.
Thank you.
So one of the things I'm hoping for today is that my diocese, our bishop is still relatively new, and we are trying to make some fairly dramatic changes, not exclusively with our budget, but enabled by our budget. And that requires changing some old ways of doing things, which is encountering some resistance. And so just thinking about how to execute a new strategy in the face of mourning about some things that are going away.
One of my primary responsibilities as canon to the ordinary is to help parishes be their healthiest, help clergy be their healthiest. What I'm hoping for is some fresh framing language and process ideas around strategic planning for parishes.
I'm rector of Church of the Good Samaritan in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I think, like Mary, we're entering a season that hopefully in a couple of years will end with a capital campaign. But my hope is leading up to that to have a process where we invite the congregation into some dreaming and some planning and ways that they feel involved in that process, some visioning to help build stakeholders as part of the community.
Hi, I'm Paul Hergesell with Trinity Cathedral in Cleveland, and I guess the things I'm looking for to try and gain some more insight is we have a cathedral, a large old church, takes a lot of maintenance. We also want to do more outreach, so I was just thinking that trying to get some more ideas on a strategic approach to how to try to balance those kind of things.
I'm Sherry Bonham. I do about everything at the church, or have my finger in it. The vestry in the end of January started the strategic plan, and we had an all-day vestry meeting where we looked at where are we now, and we're beginning to look at where do we want to go, vision and mission statement, and I want to make sure that we're following through the right way and taking the next steps properly.
I'm Joy Connor. I am from a small parish in Ocean City, Maryland, with an average Sunday attendance of about 45 people. And I'm the director of a community center that is mostly performing arts, and we serve about 800 families a year through our community center. And I'm hoping to learn more about how we can better bridge the gap between these families that clearly want to be involved in what we have to offer in our outreach programs and what our church attendance is, or whether or not that's even the right metric to have anymore, but how we can kind of recreate the church as the center of the community as it used to be.
I'm Claire Dorshuk from Durham, North Carolina. Our particular interest is we're in a bit of a transition period right now. Our rector will be leaving in September, and we're going to be looking for a new one. And we also recently finished renewal works and have that has led to a lot of different things going on in our church. So how to plan those, and particularly our focus on mission and outreach has increased a lot. And it's a good time for change, because I think people are a little more open to change than average times. So those are the reasons I was particularly interested in strategic planning.
Okay, so the battery's dead on the mic, so we're going to put that down. And Ron, if you want.
Sure. I'm a chaplain and a deacon on the outreach committee of our church. Spent over 25 years in the business world, and I'm particularly interested in a process or a system under which our church and our leaders can start to think strategically instead of tactically.
My name is Jacqueline Soltis. I'm assistant rector at Episcopal Church in historic Yorktown, Virginia. I came to the priesthood fairly recently from the academic world, and I am curious about the sort of tools that a business perspective might have that would be useful. Our parish right now is sitting in the crossroads of a lot of different winds of change. One of the major ones is their rector of 30 years just retired. So they're in the search for a new rector. A significant amount of the congregation is older and continuing to age. And there are other things going on as well. So I'd like to gain some tools, some ways of thinking so that I can speak wisely and well into the issues that the parish is confronting right now.
Okay.
My name is Nadim Nassar. I'm originally from Syria, and I'm the executive director of the Awareness Foundation based in London, and also we are registered as 501c3 in the US. And I would like to have also fresh perspective on how to bridge the vision with the programs. So we have a vision as a foundation, and we have our programs in Syria and in Iraq. And I understand strategy is this bridge between the vision and the practical, tactical programs. So we always need this bridge to be fresh and powerful, especially we are serving a very, very hard, in a very hard circumstances in Syria and Iraq. As you know, those countries are in war. So we are serving also a very sensitive age of children and young adults so that they don't become refugees. We are supporting them so that they stay in Syria, they stay in Iraq, and they transform their lives into people who can contribute positively to their community. So strategy is extremely important for me and for the Awareness Foundation.
Okay, thank you to all of you for that. Something about us. I can do the whole of the 4 hours without any notes, but I can't talk about myself without any, so excuse me for that. Second time round, I moved to America in 2009. My wife is an American, had gone to England to run a museum. We met, we got married. We were in Palm Beach in Florida, so the only places I've ever lived in America are New York, Denver, San Francisco, and Palm Beach. And I'm trying to see if I can find somewhere better, but Palm Beach is pretty good at the moment. Although the traffic can be really bad when the Secret Service come to town. In 2012, I was a member of the vestry. There were 6 vestry members, the rector and myself as a core team, and we actually built the first strategy that Bethesda had. 9 months later, we had 223 people working on the strategy project as we completed it. So it was very much about getting the church, as opposed to the leadership, to totally embrace what we were doing. Since 2015, I joined the vestry. I took over someone else's term, and then I did another term for myself, so 4.5 years. 2016, I became chair of stewardship, and this year I'm here at SEAT for, I think, for the 4th time, but the first time leading one of these sessions here. It wasn't explained to me exactly what I was taking on when I said yes, and it seems to have grown ever more, so go with me. Outside of this, after university, I joined Combustion Engineering, an American construction company that builds things like oil rigs, chemical plants, and keeping an oil rig in the North Sea totally vertical when it's only got one leg is a clever trick. So I know nothing about engineering, but I'm pretty good at maths, and so I did all the stress analysis in terms of turning differential equations into Fortran and then actually keeping something still. Exxon came along and said, they were the client, come over, and I thought I would do the same thing. 3 months later, they put me in charge of business strategy for South America, and I don't speak Spanish. So that was interesting. I moved into consulting with Touche-Ross, today you call it Deloitte's. Did that for a while, and then I've actually run or been part of about half a dozen consulting companies, either doing business strategy, large-scale change, or actually doing something to do with technology. I have probably done more than 30 strategic plans. Some for large companies, Coors Brewing, you might have heard of them. Just go down to Golden in Denver and actually find the smell, and you'll find their brewery. It's the largest one in North America. The smell of the yeast is just overpowering on a hot summer's day. Through to much smaller ones in terms of startup companies and things like that. I went back to England for a while to help look after my parents, and ended up doing strategies for the British Armed Forces, the Metropolitan Police. You probably know them as Scotland Yard. It's a bit like combine the New York police force with the FBI, with alcohol, tobacco, and whatever, and a few other things, and you just put into one police force, and that's Scotland Yard. So actually doing command and control for them was an interesting exercise. The dollars weren't the important point. The point was how fast can you actually react to a problem, and more importantly, how quickly can you actually predict the problem. And a lot of work went into the predicting bit, and now we actually try to fold that into some of the strategy that we're doing. And then the last bit in terms of my background in terms of strategy was the National Health Service. Obviously health is being talked about in lots of different ways in this country. And they broke England, not the UK, into 11 bits, and they gave me 1/11 of the UK. So I had 32 hospitals to restructure. 3 years later, we had created the equivalent of 500 doctors at zero cost. Now, how do you do that? You actually have to pay them. You can't just bring on fire. So you say, I have 5,000 doctors, and they spend 75% of the time being a doctor and 25% of the time doing administration. You actually change the processes, you change the technology, you change the way everything works, and they end up being doctors for 85% of the time. 10% of 5,000 is 500, you get 500 extra. And then the other side of the strategy, which was really different, was to build a wing on the hospital in Oxford. The wing was just for children. The wing would take 500 children. Okay, so it's a big wing to a big hospital. The whole thing was designed like Lego blocks on the outside. So when children came up, they said, no, I go to the Lego shop. I don't go over there where the adults do. And inside all the signs were tiny little signs saying to operating an X-ray, and on the ground there were footprints. So if you were going to X-ray, you followed the bear. And if you were going to operating theatre, you followed the tiger. And people who actually pushed the children around in our beds or in chairs and things like that were told to let the children actually do this. And what was the result? They came out of hospital 10% quicker. The number of children coming back in dropped by 2/3. And the parents' satisfaction with the process went up enormously. So sometimes the answer isn't a really expensive thing. This was 500 million, but the answer is not really expensive. It's to think in a very creative way about solving a problem. The problem wasn't having the hospital wing. The problem was how do you care in a totally different way? Because you think about the problem. And that's what strategy is about finding a way to think about the same problem in a totally different way and solve it that way.
Great. Before actually we start, we had Paul. We just asked folks to go around the room and ask what they hope to accomplish today, and if you want to share that or what you're hoping to do.
I'm Paul Hogan with James B. Jordan, and I am here to learn how we can help our clients who are all churches think more out of the box, solve their problems rapidly, creatively, and enable or implement new financial controls to improve their financial stability.
Thank you. Good. So, as it says on the screen, my name is Adam McDonald. I am the incoming Director of Development at St. Thomas Church in New York City. I started working there in June of 2018 as the Concerts Development Manager, and before that, I came from a background of acting and singing. My wife and I met doing a show off Broadway in 2005, and then we had some kids, and I stopped auditioning because I wasn't about to leave them, both because I didn't want to and also because she would have killed me. So during that whole phase of my life, I have been singing at the Church of the Heavenly Rest, which is at East 90th and 5th Avenue in New York City. And if some of you have been coming to see for a while, Matt Hyde is the outgoing board chair, and he's the rector at Heavenly Rest, and he's pretty much the reason I'm standing in front of you. At that place, I got really involved in community organizing and stewardship and different even ministry, and so those became the things that I woke up the proverbial excited to go to work thing. And so a couple years ago we had a conversation, that was, well, what would you like to do? Have you thought about nonprofit work? And I said, what's that? And here I am. So as the incoming director of development, St. Thomas Church has both a congregation of about 640 and also a choir school. It's the only boarding school left in the East-Western Hemisphere that is full-time boarding school for training boys in the Anglican tradition. That is a building on 58th Street, about 6 blocks away from where we're at. What I like about strategy is the fact that there isn't, the process is often the product. And both St. Thomas and Heaven the Rest have gone through entire strategic planning processes in the last year and a half. At Heavenly Rest, I helped to facilitate as a vestry member. And we did it in-house. We created, which you'll hear about, what we did what's called an explore process. And that was led both with lay leaders and clergy. It was awesome. And then at St. Thomas, because of the choir school and the financial obligation of that, and the status of looking down the road at how we were doing our finances, they hired an outside firm, Wellspring Consulting, and they did about 15 months of a strategic plan, out of which has come a lot of different initiatives, including the office that I am in, the Office of Institutional Advancement, where I'm the first person of what will be 4 people, both handling communications and fundraising for the church and the school. So it's been a wonderful thing to be a part of, and that was basically at the same time that I arrived. Beyond that, I like a good quote, and Agnandino says that no great things were ever accomplished without enthusiasm. So I am excited about today, and we're going to get up and get on our feet and discuss, and I encourage you to jump in and have fun. By the time we check out tomorrow morning, I think we're all going to be pretty good friends.
We're here to talk about strategy from the business side coming into the side associated with faith. But it seemed to us that we should actually start with a prayer. And there it was, do we just actually make this up while we're here based on what you've just said and what we were thinking? Or do we actually try and find something that actually reflects this? I'm English, so I went and found English prayer. And this person who actually is attributed to this prayer, if you're in England, they're a 16th century explorer. And if you go to Spain, they're a 16th century pirate who stole the gold and silver from the Spanish, who had stolen it from the indigenous people of Central and South America. We just forget that point. So, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Disturb us, Lord, when we are too well pleased with ourselves, when our dreams have come true because we have dreamed too little, when we arrive safely because we sailed too close to the shore. Disturb us, Lord, when with the abundance of things we possess, we have lost our thirst for the waters of life, having fallen in love with life. We have ceased to dream of eternity, and in our efforts to build a new earth, we've allowed our vision of the new heaven to dim. Disturb us, Lord, to dare more boldly, to venture on wider seas where storms will show your mastery, where losing sight of land, we shall find the stars. We ask you to push back the horizons of our hopes and to push into the future in strength, courage, hope, and love. Amen.
Amen.
You may have heard of it, Sir Francis Drake, and you may have heard the prayer, but I think the prayer is brilliant in the context of striving to do more and stop being happy with what we've actually achieved, and to think in a different way. Why strategy? What does strategy mean to you? Just take a minute. You don't have to write anything down, you can just think about it. Right? 2 or 3 words, not a sentence, individual words. What do you think strategy is?
Anticipating and optimizing.
Anyone else?
Plan.
Plan.
framework of understanding that helps you get from here to there.
Dreaming.
Sorry?
Dreaming.
Dream.
Roadmap for implementing the dream.
The way to fulfill the vision.
Sorry?
The way to fulfill the vision.
Okay, so method, vision, and fulfilling.
Action.
A path.
Sorry, a path. Any more?
Resources.
Organization.
Possibilities.
Possibility, option. Okay, possibilities.
Brainstorming.
Okay.
Kind of
It's a process, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. Any more? Okay, so we have a vision. This all seems to come together there. We have a plan. We have a solution. Do you think we missed anything? I think you did really well. I think I did even better because I got them to go in the circles. All right? Pick these up. They don't trip over. So, yes, we shared them. Okay. Think about this for your church, your organization. Does your organization or church actually have a strategy that's not very good, or does it not have a strategy? And the second option is, do you have one that's good or even better than good? So I'm just going to do this with hands going up. So who answers the first one with a yes? You have no strategy.
Oh, yes, we have.
You have no strategy, or it's not very good. Go on, stick them up high so everyone can see. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7.5. Okay, who has a good or even a better strategy? 2, 3, 4, 5. So to the 5 of you, put your hands up again. Okay, we just go around. Why are you here if you already have a really good strategy?
We have clarity of vision, but it's not as systematic as it might be.
Okay.
We're in the process of completing our strategic plan, and I want to make sure there are no holes in it.
Okay. Someone over here.
Looking for new ideas always.
Okay.
I want to improve that path between vision and achievements.
Okay. Very good. The answer is you never have a perfect strategy, but if it's a very good one, it should actually guide you for about 5 years. Okay? One part of it is a vision, and the vision is way further out, 10 or 15 years. It's a real strategic plan of this is what I want to achieve. It's like a 5-year period. What you want to achieve, and that is strategy. What you want to achieve this year and plan for next year is tactics. Okay? So, Chinese have been at this for a very long time. If you read The Art of War, really good book, strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. You will win, but if all you have is a strategy, it takes a very long time. If you only have tactics without strategy, you're going to lose in war. Okay? And making this really simple, strategy is the why and the what, and tactics is the rest, who, where, when. Okay? So, when you're asking questions at the strategic level, You should be really focusing on why and what. And what you normally do is to go, I want to do this because of this. So the what is what I want to do, and why do I want to do it is the why part of it. You put those two together, and you end up with a really good statement. And you'll see we have lots of examples of these to actually show you in different contexts and things like that. But we are drawing on the experience that Adam has there, the experience I have from Bethesda by the Sea. One of my clients was the Salvation Army. Now that's a church, but a really different church to the Episcopal Church, okay? And does some very interesting things that the Episcopal Church would never touch. But you learn from this process. So, one more bit in terms of positioning to actually make sure that we're thinking about strategy in the right way and what we're going to do this afternoon and tomorrow. To make this work, you need to really listen very, very carefully. And you need to let your imagination go. And you need to close your eyes now. Everyone close their eyes. Close your eyes. Okay. And no peeking. Okay? Listen to the words really carefully. Imagine a large coloured ball in the middle of this room. It is not there, just imagine it was there. The ball is strategy. Everything you want from strategy is inside that ball. The room is filled with people, all of us here today. Each sees the ball from a different direction, from a different height, a different distance, and sees a different colour and size. Strategy is not one size fits all. Repeat. Strategy is not one size fits all. Your ball is different to the next person's ball, is different to the next person's ball. And the most difficult thing is you could all be coming from the same church and still see the same ball totally differently. And the trick of strategy is to bring everybody together. We would like you to come on a journey this afternoon and tomorrow morning to find the best strategic approach for you and your church or your organisation. That is what we're hoping to do. That is what we've set out as our goal over this period of time. Now you're allowed to peek, those of you who are already peeking. Thank you. Okay? So, all of you come from different places and therefore would have a different strategy, different locations, different sizes and things like that. But you could all be members of the same church and still have this different viewpoint. And part of a really good strategy is the process that actually starts to blend that into a viewpoint that's almost accepted by everybody. You will never get the same viewpoint accepted by everybody. Like, as they say, all you need is 3 Episcopalians to get 4 opinions. Okay?
Are you supposing, Paul, that we agree already on the vision? Are you supposing that?
No.
Oh, okay. But how can the strategy unite us if we do not have all of us the same vision?
You can have a vision. Let's say one of the ones we're going to bring up later is help 3rd grade reading. Okay, because 50% of the children in Florida fail 3rd grade reading. And in Palm Beach County, that's 7,000 children out of 14,000. So the vision is to solve that. Okay? But what does the word solve mean? Now that will be different to almost everybody in their head. That they pass the test will be some people's view. I wouldn't agree with that at all. I would agree actually getting them to the right level is what I want to get to. Okay? And another person says, well, it doesn't really matter, does it? So we can have the same vision, and here's 3 viewpoints on the same vision. And the plan gets more difficult, and as we move into implementation, it gets more difficult. The trick is trying to articulate the vision in a way that more and more people will actually come to the same viewpoint of it. In this case, how do we get the children to read as well as possible? Because all the academic research shows if you solve that problem, high school dropouts drops like a rocket. High school graduation goes up like a rocket. Children going to university goes up. Okay? All research says you can't solve the problem in high school, but you can solve the problem from K to 3rd grade. And then you actually do some more work in terms of, well, what do you do before then? I did a 2.5-year project on that. That's why all the stuff's in my head. And it's like, they say the best time to start the education is at 6 months. The number of regulations to do something for a 6-month-year-old is about up here. For a kindergarten person, it's about down here. So you have to set your expectations. But we'll come back to that, because visioning is really important.
And visioning is also not a being, it's a spectrum.
That's right.
So, cool beans, okay. So we mentioned we're going to get up, and that time is now. So if everyone can come and make a circle around this table, and while you do, we're going to talk about yes and. Raise your hand if you've ever done any improv. Okay, raise your hand if you've ever gone to an improv show. So we're going to talk about yes and. Yes and is the core principle of, don't be shy, come on over around the table here. Yes and is the core principle of improv, and the basic premise is that when we're going to circle around this table, right? So, yep, go ahead. So when we say yes and in the context of improvisation, it is I enter a scene and my scene partner says, ah, my favorite one-legged doctor, so wonderful to see you. And I say, what are you talking about? I'm a fireman. And what I've done there is deny his initiative and stop everything cold. The scene is over. There's nowhere to go. And suddenly, that disagreement, there is no grace in that. Versus, I receive the line, ah, my favorite one-legged doctor, so wonderful to see you. And I say, Father, it's been too long. And suddenly, we have agreement, we have participation, we have acknowledgement. Now that doesn't mean that I stick with this. In two beats, I could just put my leg back down and say, oh, it's a miracle. But at least now we have a relationship. And as we enter into these processes, that's the important thing. We don't necessarily have to all agree on the vision, right? Your vision may be different than mine, but we're working towards vision together. I'm not going to deny what you're saying, and I'm going to say yes, and we're going to add to it. So, we're in a circle, because we're going to play an improv game. And the improv game is called Zip, Zap, Zop. And the reason that we're doing this is because we're going to engage. The point of the game is to actually help your partner. And eventually we all get to do it together, and it can be fun. So first it comes with those 3 words, zip, zap, zop. Say it with me. Zip, zap, zop. One more time. Zip, zap, zop. So they always go in that order. So I say zip and you say zap. And you say zop. Great. So that's the first part. The second part is a gesture. And the gesture will help reinforce the connection. So the connection is eye contact. You're intentional about that. And then we just do this. So practice that with me. Go ahead. So when I serve up a zip, I do it like this. Zip. Zip. And then that person receives it, and they turn, and they give a zap. And then that you receive that, and you go and you do a zap. Okay? So let's just try. Trial run. There's no getting it wrong. There's just helping each other. Zip. Zap.
Zap.
So it restarts.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So we just keep going.
Zip.
Zap.
Zap.
Zip.
Zap.
Zip.
Zap.
Zap.
Zip. Zap.
Zap.
Zip. Zap.
Zip.
Zap.
Zap.
Good. So that's the premise. Now the goals here are 2 things. One, to help each other. We're not trying to fake out. I'm not saying zip like this. I'm saying I'm going to give that to you. And the second thing is speed. And so don't hesitate. Don't make a decision about it. Just go with it. Wherever your eyes land, wherever your and then eventually we're trying to get fast. And then there's one little additive that we'll add in after, but we're going to work on this for just a couple more minutes. And then again, the premise being when you're working in community, in your churches, in your places of worship, in your community centers, the idea that we all are going together is so important to the work that we're doing today. So, zip.
Zap.
Zip.
Zap.
Zap. Zip.
Zap.
Zip.
Zap.
Zap.
Zip.
Zap.
Zap.
Zip.
Zap.
Zop.
Zip.
Zap.
Zip. Zap. Zop.
Zip.
Groovalicious. So when you get one and you decide it's time to reset, we do a Groovalicious, and then everybody repeats it and does their very own Groovalicious. So I do Groovalicious, and you do Groovalicious. Great, here we go. Zip.
Zap. Zop.
Zip.
Zap.
Zop.
Zip.
Zap.
Zop. Zip.
Zip.
That's good. Zap.
Zap.
Zip.
Zap.
Zop.
Zip.
Zap.
Zap.
Zip. Zap.
Zop.
Zip. Zap. Zop.
Zip.
Zap. Zap.
Oh, sorry.
Good. One more time, and keep in mind, if at any point you receive any of the zip, zap, zops, you can do a Groovalicious. You're free to choose in that moment. I probably wasn't clear about that.
No.
Clarity of instruction. Vision. Okay. Zip.
Zap.
Zop.
Zip.
Zap.
Zop.
Zip.
Zap.
Zop.
Very good. We can find our seats again. Thank you all. You can play too.
Yeah.
You can see out of the two of us, the American is a lot more fun to be with. We're just sticking with stereotypes. If you go and get any business book that talks about strategy and you go to the back and you find the glossary, you're going to find lots of these terms up here. And every single one up there we're not going to touch. Okay? The ones that are missing in yellow are the ones we're going to talk about. What I've tried to do in my time is, at one point I was a lecturer for postgraduate students at the London School of Economics, teaching PhDs and usually MSCs in terms of the economic side of things, but also in terms of sort of how do you actually align things that are changing with your strategy going forwards. A big change factor in those days was the technology. Today it's the technology, but it's also the environment we're in and things like that. And when I stopped doing it for big corporations and moved into doing it for public bodies, we actually had to sort of find a different way to explain it. And then we moved from public bodies into non-profits, found we actually had to explain the same thing again in a very different way. And when we moved from non-profits into faith-based non-profits, churches, haven't done a synagogue yet, but Salvation Army was very different to the Episcopal Church. So it was, how do we actually come up with a set of words that we can actually agree on, a very small vocabulary. And you'll see as we go along, in certain places I'll say, okay, we could have called this, and this. I have been in too many meetings where people argued over whether something was a goal or an objective. That is a complete and utter waste of my time as far as I'm concerned. So what are we going to call it? So one of the things was, we are hoping out of this, Joe Swimmer actually runs the suite, says he would like to create a network, not a technology network, but a people network where we can actually share information. And if we're going to share information, we actually have to have a vocabulary that we can actually talk about, okay? So the words in yellow are what you will see later on as we work our way through. And when I'm deliberately not using another word, I'll explain that, okay? A good one is priorities. I call them strategic priorities. You could call them goals, you could call them objectives, you could call them lots of different things. I basically say there are 3 tiers of strategic priorities in the faith-based sense, and that's very easy to follow, and we'll talk about that, okay? So, a lot of these other things are to do with reporting of usually manufacturing companies and how well they're doing, and some of them are actually to do with federal government regulations in terms of how you actually report information, things like that. So we can leave all of that out of it. But as a little aside, Six Sigma, who's heard of Six Sigma, okay? And these days they usually call it Lean Six Sigma and stuff like that. It's basically for the manufacturing industry, and it was like, how many times, if you do the same thing 1 million times, how many errors can you have? And the mathematics is you can have 3.4 errors in a million. A slightly different way to look at it is you can have 3,400 errors in a billion with a B. 3,400. Never get onto a project, I've done it once, that goes to 7 sigma. Because out of the 1 billion, you can only have 19 errors. Okay? And this was a leasing company, leasing time on satellites. Sending out the engineer when there was a problem was a real problem. So, the manufacturing and the design process and the QA were at a totally different level. Okay? Do not get on a project like that. It is totally horrendous. I'm glad I've never had to do it again. Okay, so we start with some people in your church, some stakeholders. So clergy and staff, leadership, members and volunteers. The reason for putting volunteers like that is you may have it. At Bethesda, we have it's not a thrift store, it's a very high scale resale shop. Okay? It is 100 yards away from Worth Avenue, one of the most expensive places to go shopping that you can find. And as they say, every disease on the planet is celebrated by a gala in Palm Beach for fundraising. Okay? And the ladies who organise this, and it's always the ladies that organise this, will not wear the dress where they were the chair of a gala more than once in a year. Okay? And usually next season it ends up being worn once more, and then it comes to our shop. Okay? It was only 2,500, and we'll sell it for 200. Okay? Whoever buys it for 200 thinks they got a great bargain, and we pay 0 for it. So we actually, our shop sales last year were $1 million. Net receipts were 650,000. 50,000 went into our reserve fund for the shop, not for the church. And 600,000 was given to the church, and then the church gave to outreach in the local community 600,000 and kept for itself 0. Okay? Now that is working with the community, because half the volunteers are members of the church. Lots of our volunteers are Jewish ladies. Okay? Lots of people who make donations are not members of our church. But it's seen as a community store. Okay? The first thing you actually have to do is actually commit all of those groups, not just the rector and the vestry, but all of those groups have to commit to, we need a strategy. Now, why you need it and how you convince them is totally different for everybody. If you're taking notes, all of this will be available about 2 weeks after Seek online. Okay? You can still take your notes as you're going along, because a lot of the things that we're saying aren't on here. Would you like to come in and take a seat? Don't worry.
I have to duck out in 5 minutes, but yes, I'm listening.
Yeah, you missed the singing and the dancing, and we got into the really boring bits now. Okay. Everybody else spent about 30 seconds and just explained not who they are, but why they would like to be here. Like, what are they expecting to get? Would you like to tell us?
Sure. Yeah, Dan, go for it. First of all, sorry we're late.
I feel like I'm at a disadvantage.
Our dog sitters came late. We're from Cincinnati, from Christchurch Cathedral. I guess I'll start. I'm an associate musician there, and I'm representing the noon service, which is a newer community that developed in the last 2 years. And I'm just here to learn, honestly, just to take in some information. So.
I work with the noon service you referred to, which is sort of a growing congregation within a congregation, and we're suddenly having to make longer-term decisions than we were a year or so ago, and so suddenly issues of strategy and vision are becoming much more relevant.
Okay. You just missed a fun game.
Oh.
Now we're moving on to, this is a picture that will actually describe everything else that we're going to cover in the next 5 hours, this afternoon and tomorrow. Okay? So you arrived at a really good time. So first of all, we have sort of the internal stakeholders that we have there. And as I was saying, you actually have to get that group to commit to a strategy. What does a strategy mean to them, and why are we doing it? Just answer those 2 questions, and you can get people on board. Okay? The first thing you need to do is to go, before we try and build a strategy, you actually need to know where we are. Okay? So that's the very simple thing. So I call it inventory. What ministries do we have? What assets do we have in terms of people, buildings, money? And what are the metrics associated with those? not grades. And what are the needs? You first of all obviously start off with the needs of your members, the needs of your church. Okay? But that is nowhere near good enough. That's about a third of the answer. Okay? You then need to actually look at the community that you're serving. Now you start with your local community, and then if in the past you have always done something in the Caribbean or somewhere further afield than that in terms of helping an orphanage, doing lots in Africa in terms of water provision and things like that, then you would feed that in. And so there's community leaders, other organisations, those in need, and customers. A really good example is the strategy we did for the Salvation Army. My wife usually runs museums, but she finished running a museum and she had some time, and she said, I'll come along and help you with the strategy for the Salvation Army, because having run museums in Palm Beach, she actually knew almost every politician in Palm Beach County. Okay? So it's like, instead of me calling up the politicians, like the mayors, the commissioners, the whatever, the representatives, the senator, whatever, and saying, I'm Paul, and they say, who? She said, I'm Sandra, and they'd say, oh, it's good to hear from you again, what would you like? Okay, so we actually spoke to probably 60% of the politicians in Palm Beach County, and the federal representatives and senators, and we actually went and talked to people who actually ran things like community centres that understood a particular part of West Palm Beach or whatever. To step back, in terms of the words here, there is the town of Palm Beach. Across the water, you get to the United States. Okay? It's called the Intercoastal Waterway. A lot of the people who live in Palm Beach regard it as almost like a separate place. Okay? You have the city of West Palm Beach. Above that, you have North Palm Beach, which is a town. Below that, you have South Palm Beach, which is a town. Okay? All of them are reasonable towns and cities in the sort of 50 to 100,000 with normal spectrum of wealthy to poor. And then you have Palm Beach. In the winter, it's 10,000 people. In the summer, it's 10,000 people. And in the winter, it's 30,000 people. And most of those extra 20,000 people actually have homes in Palm Beach that sit empty for 8 months of the year. Okay? The Fortune 200 in terms of richest people in the world, 63 of them or whatever have a house in Palm Beach. Okay? President Trump has a place you've heard about called Mar-a-Lago. Okay? It's about 3 miles from my house. It's a real pain in the neck because it's right in between me and all the main shops and restaurants. So actually, we're going to loop when he's there because they close the road. But the Secret Service are really polite and very friendly, so that side looks pretty good. So when people at Bethesda are trying to look at what the needs are, you aren't going to say, well, what's the food need in Palm Beach? There is zero, okay? So Bethesda actually works with another church, St. George's, in a place called Riviera Beach near West Palm Beach, who actually feeds the homeless. And it has about 5 churches, including Bethesda, that actually helps it. So the need of your community should be reflecting not just what's within a mile of you or whatever, but what's a bit further away, okay? It's also really interesting to go and talk to some of the people who are truly in need. Go to a shelter and talk to the person who basically moves from one shelter to another. Go to a food bank and actually talk to the people who are hungry most of the time. Whatever you work out as problems, when we asked every single politician what was the number one problem for them, it was homelessness. It wasn't anything. They didn't talk about substance abuse, but that was one of the causes. But every single one, 62 out of 63 said homelessness. Why? Because they got people calling them saying, these homeless people are down in our park. Comments like that. Really horrible, totally biased comments. But it will give you a different view to, if we just done this in Bethesda internally, we wouldn't, in that case it was a Salvation Army, they didn't have this comprehension of that was the problem. Okay? So you need to look broader. Okay? You need a wide-angle lens on your camera, you don't want a telephoto lens. Okay? And you actually want to really listen. It's amazing what you can find out if you just sit there quietly and don't say anything for a while. And people who don't normally talk a lot actually start talking. And then you learn. So, why do we do metrics? So we want to know how big something is, how many meals do we make, how many children do we mentor, or whatever. We don't want to know the grades. Is it any good? Good, bad, or indifferent? Because there you're testing it against what has been. Later in the process, you want to test it against what is your vision, what is your plan for the future. And that then determines whether or not what you're doing is right or wrong, or needs to be changed, or just thrown away. Then we define the future. Really quickly now. There's a vision, there's a mission and values, and there's strategic priorities. The vision is 10, 15 years out. It's a dream. And the mission and values is 5 years. But it's a realistic dream. Our vision is not single-handedly solve hunger in the world. Even those of you coming from a cathedral can't do that. Okay? Not in a church. Right? And the mission and values is why we exist, 5 years, strategic priorities. That's what I was talking about. Forget goals, forget objectives, forget all these other words. You have a strategic priority for the church, a set of them. Let's say, we'll use the example of Bethesda. We have 4 strategic priorities, and we'll actually talk about them in detail later on. Now under that, you actually get the major ministry groups like outreach, evangelism, worship, things like that, and they have strategic priorities. And then perhaps, let's say in outreach, in our case we split it into education, food, and shelter. Each of those would have strategic. So we end up with a tier of strategic priorities. We're using the same word, but we're explaining which tier it belongs to. Then we don't have all these silly arguments as to what a word means and stuff like that. Then we do the assessment, which I was talking about, like how well does the inventory work in terms of the vision and the strategic plan. Then we actually plan and we deliver. The 5-year plan is your strategic plan. The plan starts with the leadership. It doesn't start with lots of strategic plans. These are all the things we're going to have to do, and this is how much it's going to cost. How are you organised? It's almost the most important thing. And your plan should have a plan for how you're going to raise the money. We get into strategic fundraising as opposed to tactical fundraising, which is like your annual campaign and stuff like this. And it's not a capital campaign. Okay? It's whatever is appropriate to what you're doing. And then you have your tactical plan, your annual plan. The one we use, which has been working really well for 8 years, is here's a detailed plan for 2020, and here's our strategic priorities for next year. During 2020, what do we need to do next year? Not go and do the things for next year, but what do we need to do? What will be the problems there? What are the issues? Let's solve the issues this year and become proactive. Okay? All right. Around all of that is leadership. Leadership includes communication. Okay? And communication, definition of the word, is two-way exchange, not just top to bottom. Okay? And then you get some changes that come in. You might not be able to do anything about it. It's a change in the law or something like that. But usually you have time to plan for it. And then you get these really silly changes that just bounce along and usually hit them in the backside when you weren't looking. And the rector's resigned. The bishop wants you to do something totally different from what you're doing. All of that, with techniques and examples and things like that, is what we hope to cover. And where we hope it's not this. You can get a much more complicated version of this out of the business book. Okay? This is a really simple version that works. It works in churches, it works in non-profits. I'm up to 8 so far. Okay? 2 churches, Bethesda and the Salvation Army, and 6 non-profits. And the same approach has worked for all of them. The answer is different, totally. Okay? How do you find out? So, internally you talk to people. So how might you do that?
Do you want to take a break now?
I think we just do this one and then take a break.
Okay. So we talked about the explore process, which is what we did at Heavenly Rest. It was like what I consider like a grassroots thing. It started just as Paul laid out with conversations among First, the vestry. We invited in yep.
Sorry, how large is the congregation there? Just to kind of give me a scope of like.
I think pledging members are 360 families. Our ASA is around 300. But part of this and part of that is that we've stressed a 7-day ministry. So there are people that come to the jazz festival service that never come on a Sunday morning. There are people that come to our Celtic service on Wednesdays that never come on a Sunday morning. And we recently, we had a school that left 6 years ago. We reclaimed 20,000 square feet for programming and mission, and have begun to use that space on a daily basis for, you know, all kinds of different ministerial things that aren't necessarily, you know, typical metric tracking. So we started with conversations at the vestry. We invited Nathan Kirkpatrick, who works at the Alban Institute at Duke. If you don't know Nathan, Nathan is a genius, and I encourage you to find him and have a conversation. He's giving several presentations this week, and I would recommend going to any of them if you can. And he sort of led us through the beginnings of the Explore process. We talk a lot about story. What is the story that we're telling? What is the story that you're hearing? Who is doing the telling? And how is that being shared? We started with the vestry, but began immediately to look laterally. Where are leaders that aren't necessarily appointed to a particular committee or subgroup or, you know, board that can help us and can be both leaders in the conversation and contributors to it? And then the next steps were, you know, what's that 2-year plan? What's that 5-year plan? What's the big 15-year plan? And the measures. We continue to talk about metrics. I feel like there's an algorithm out there that can replace ASA. I don't know what it is yet, but we spend a lot of time thinking about how to figure it out. And again, those conversations are exciting. You feel like you're part of something. The people that you're engaging suddenly, you know, feel lifted up in both a spiritual sense and a value sense. That has a ripple effect. They're going out, they're talking in coffee hour. Hey, we were talking about this on Tuesday at the blank. What do you think? Those word of mouth, those interpersonal, what I think of as like sparks, are really valuable. And that's what I noticed most of all. It was as much the doing of it as what we found out, and we found out a lot. So we started with the vestry and the internal conversations and lay leaders. And then on a Sunday, we had our Explorer Sunday, and we put paper in the end of the pews, and we asked 2 questions at the announcement time. What is God? Where is God for you now? And where do you need God? And in essence, what we're saying is, how's it going for you? What's going well for you here in this place? And then what can we do better? And we collected those, and you know, in very like logistical manner, passed the basket, put the answers in, someone tallied them. Out of that, we saw like a thematic, different themes that started to emerge. We would do, going forward, each Sunday we would have different, that was the kickoff. Then we would do, I was a vestry liaison. We had appointed, you know, leaders and people going back to the vestry saying, these are the conversations that we're having. And then people leading those conversations, listening. And those thematic things continue to emerge. The invitation, we would set up a table. We would mention it in every bulletin and every email that goes out. The rector has a very specific email campaign that he does, and this would be a part of every single time. We had a hotline set up where you could call and just leave a message. This is the answer to my 2 questions. It was multiple ways for people to answer, and not just that Sunday, if you missed it, you're out, or, you know, we're asking you to do a lot of homework. Because, you know, part of the listening process is meeting people where they are. And our families go to soccer on Sunday mornings, you know, they can't come. How are we reaching out to them? The mechanisms of reportage were varied and specific. We had one particular clergy person that was tasked with like amassing an old-fashioned binder with each individual bit of communication. We had another person who would take the answers and pull the themes out, and I mean, you know, sort of old-fashioned. How many people like could attribute to this theme? We had over like 1,200 responses. We would after the church, we would do dinners at the rectory. You know, constantly in this conversation, thinking about the listening, thinking about, you know, where is God, and oh, I could use that too. We did. We've begun to use terms like marketing, which is not like the most church term in the world, but we would Facebook and socials. We made a video about the Explore process with background music and 90 seconds on YouTube, so we could share it. We could say, hey, this is my place. This is what I'm doing. Why don't you come and be a part of this story? So what we got at the end of this question and answer, and there were more, and I'd be happy at any point to supply the nuts and bolts of it. I didn't want to bore you with like the entirety of the thing, but we found a set of guiding principles. We discovered organically a framework for the decision making. It's not always, top down, and we engaged a whole bunch of people that then began to lead the new initiatives that came out of it. And basically what we boiled down to was belonging, connecting, and exploring. And so searching, connecting, and belonging. And that we sort of refer back to those three core principles in every step that we take going forward. Whether or not we're going to invite a play group to rent our space, or whether we're going to do Jazz Vespers every Sunday of the year. It's belonging, searching, connecting. We would have all of these things, and I would follow up with this in that when Paul was talking before about engaging broad-based, make friends with your council person. Make friends with invite them to be part of things. Because when it comes time for them to do something to support you, then you have that relationship. Okay, we'll stop there.
I'm making 16 minutes past, so we'll start again at 25 past. So 9-10 minutes, just to give you a break.